Welcome to the December 13th, 2021 regular meeting for the Board of Water Supply. My name is Chair Brian Andai. I'd like to take a moment to take the roll call of the board members who are present. When you hear your name, please say aye. Vice Chair Osbro,
Aye.
Board Member Naalehu Anthony,
Aye.
Board Member Jade Butai.
Aye.
All right, we do anticipate a few more members to join us in just a few minutes. Board members who are calling in or video conferencing in, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you should have a question or comment or wish to enter a motion or second a motion, please state your name. Well, unmute yourself first and then state your name before continuing to speak for the record. Also in the room with me today are Manager Ernest Lau and Board Secretary Joy Cruz Atu. Joining on WebEx to monitor public testimony is Mr. Stephen Nordstrom, Information Specialist 2 with our Communications Office. And joining us by telephone conference or WebEx are attorneys Jeff Lau and Jessica Wah, both from the City and County's Corporation Counsel Department. Again, for those of you who are participating remotely, please mute your microphone if you haven't already, and unmute only when you intend to speak to the entire group. If you encounter technical issues during today's meeting, please use the WebEx chat to send a direct message to our support team. To open the chat window, please click or tap on the text bubble icon on the right side of the WebEx toolbar. As we begin today's regular meeting, I'd like to state that this board is dedicated to providing safe, dependable, and affordable supply of water now and into the future. As I mentioned earlier, because of COVID protocols, some board members, in fact, all board members except for myself, are participating from remote locations via WebEx at this time. We have accepted testimony, both written and mail, as well as online testimony. However, if you did not have a chance to testify, you can call in to 808-748-6040. Again, that telephone number is 808-748-6040. Callers will be placed in a queue and brought up to testify one at a time. Stay on the line for further instructions. Meeting materials or the board packet, which is defined under HRS section 92-7.5, are accessible at our website at www.boardofwatersupply.com. Again, that's www.boardofwatersupply.com spelled out. This meeting will also be viewable via live streaming today on our website at www.boardofwatersupply.com/live. I also understand that we may have a news station or two that is currently live streaming our meeting today. We have three items on our agenda today that require board action. Item number one requiring board action is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on November 22nd, 2021. Can I entertain a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Second, Jade.
Thank you. It was moved by member Anthony, seconded by member Butai. Is there any discussion at this time? Are there any corrections or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, I will call for the question. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the regular meeting held on November 22nd, 2021, as it appears in the board packet, say aye.
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 Is there anyone who opposes approval of the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are accepted unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the second item on our agenda. And this is to consider the adoption of resolution number 931, 2021. This is regarding the Navy's Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility and the associated water contamination issues. What I plan to do today, for everyone's convenience, because we do have some executive session items that we have to discuss, and also because we are consulting with our attorneys today, I believe, on this matter. We need to discuss some matters regarding Red Hill in executive session. I'm going to pass this item. This is the item on the resolution regarding the Navy's Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility and associated water contamination issues. I'm going to pass this item to the end of today's agenda. And it's a little different, and especially to the news stations who may be streaming this, what's going to happen is we're going to go through our regular agenda. There is also a Red Hill agenda item, and we're going to go into executive session, and then we're going to return later on in the day and be back live and open to the public at the end, following executive session at the end of our agenda. So I'm gonna pass items to I'm gonna pass item 2 to the end of the agenda. Item 3 is to authorize a public hearing. So we're just authorizing a public hearing on this item to consider a proposed amendment to add an emergency Halava Valley groundwater monitoring wells project to its fiscal year 2021-2022 capital improvement program budget in response to the reported contamination of the Navy's Red Hill shaft. Chair recognizes Ms. Raylin Nakabayashi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Just give me 1 second and I'm going to open up my PowerPoint.
Excuse me, Ms. Nakabayashi, just for the record, I'd like to recognize Board Member Matt Sword, who is now in attendance here in the board.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board Member Sword. So my presentation today, as Chair mentioned, is requesting authorization for a public hearing to consider a proposed amendment to our fiscal year 21-22 capital improvement program budget. And like mentioned, it is to add a project, an emergency Halava Valley groundwater monitoring well. So there is a draft notice of public hearing in board pack for all the board members to review, but essentially we're requesting the authority to have a public hearing at 2 p.m. next month, January 24th, in the boardroom to discuss this proposed amendment to our fiscal year 21-22 CIP budget. So if authorized, we will post this and we will be prepared to have a public discussion on the proposed amendment. Resolution 923-2021 was the adoption of our fiscal year 21-22 budget. It appropriated $179,976,000 for our CIP program as presented back in May. This was the CIP program that was adopted. So bottom right corner, 179,976 million was appropriated, and it was appropriated across these categories and for these types of projects. The amendment we wish to have a public hearing on, should the board authorize a public hearing, will add $2 million, a project numbered 3A titled Halava Valley Groundwater Monitoring Wells Phase 2 for $2 million to research and development project category. And it will also remove $2 million worth of funding that was appropriated for project number 25 within our project category pipelines for new service lateral installations at various locations. We have no intention of pursuing project line number 25 and will instead use the funding for project 3A. So new project number 3A for the Halava Valley Groundwater Monitoring Wells project is the installation of wells at Site H. And this is just a map of where Site H is in that area, indicated by the red arrow, sorry. So the plans, specifications, environmental assessment, and other necessary approvals for this project have already been completed. We're updating those plans and specs now and working to obtain the necessary permits to move this project forward immediately, pending the adoption of the budget amendment and the funds becoming available. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer. Thank you.
So just to reiterate, Ms. Nakabayashi, this action is to simply authorize a public hearing. And at that
Yes.
public hearing, we're going to be talking about possibly shifting the CIP budget, basically to allocate $2 million to install monitoring wells near the Halava Valley. This is in response to the reported contamination of the Navy's Red Hill shaft.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. So at the January 24th meeting, should you authorize it, we will be discussing in detail the amendment to the budget, which is required because project number 3A, or that's what we're proposing to call it, was never a part of the appropriation for fiscal year 22. It was not a listed or named CIP project. So to move forward with a project for this project, we would need to amend the CIP program to list the project, though we're making the funding available from an existing project line.
I see. Okay, members, any questions?
Raymond, sorry for my ignorance, but considering the emergency nature of what's happening in Halava, what is the timeline going to the public hearing and that the whole 9 yards getting it done? What's the timeline?
So I'm sorry, I don't know if Ernie, if you can speak to the construction timeline, but we need to make the funding available to make the contract award.
Oh, well, no, I'm talking about the process, about the public hearing and all that stuff. Well, what's the timeline?
Oh, I'm sorry, just for that. So we'll post a public notice. I think it requires 2 weeks ahead in the newspaper. So if you authorize it today, I'll make sure that we do the appropriate notifications in the newspaper for the public hearing and online. And then we'll hold the public hearing at 2 p.m. prior to the start of our regular board meeting next month. And should the board act on the proposed amendment, which would be a resolution amending the fiscal year 21-22 CIP budget, the monies become immediately available for us to move the project forward.
Okay, what I'm leading up to is that considering the emergency nature of what's happening in Halava, isn't there some kind of an emergency shortcut that we can proceed in getting the funds available to get the project done right away?
Board member Sword, this project is not listed in our CIP.
No, I understand that.
But by listing in our CIP, then we can shift funds around within the CIP to fund it. You know, what's me.
Well, I'm just more concerned about
And what we're looking at actually is, rather than waiting till next fiscal year to say program this, we're looking at moving it up to this fiscal year and going through an emergency procurement process, which will help expedite the the construction of this test well.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah.
Board Member Sword's question is there any way we can do this faster than what we've?
Yeah, to put it
Right.
simply,
Yeah, right now, I think our challenge is that in our currently approved CIP budget, which the board approved, this is not identified. We don't have a line item project in there that would qualify to actually do a test well like this. Now, if we had something like that, then I wouldn't even come back to the board. I would just proceed. But because we don't have a line item project that could possibly fit into this category, then I can't just keep on adding new projects to the CIP.
No, I understand that, Ernie. What I'm trying to say is that you got this public hearing that's in 2 to 3 weeks.
In January.
In January, I mean,
Uh,
I mean, is there any way that the board can just approve the funding and proceed? I mean,
I think,
that's what I'm trying to ask. Is there some way to kind of shorten up the process so that we can get this done?
I think there's a process that we have to follow to amend our budget, but Raylan, want to add anything to that, or maybe we can ask the question?
So,
or-
the procurement code or chapter 103 in the state procurement code does allow for emergency procurements to happen and proceed without delay, and contracts come after the fact. Those are just after the fact award emergency contracts, and I believe we are doing everything we can to get that going. So we of course defer to the authority of the board to actually allow us to amend the CIP project, but I understand what you're saying, Board Member Sword. There is an urgency here. We're working on this. We're not planning on soliciting this competitive bid, the normal process of 103D. We are planning to exercise the emergency exemptions under 103 to award an emergency project, because this is a threat to health and safety, which I believe does qualify for using those emergency, and then everything would be after the fact type awards and expenditures.
Vice Chair Sproat has her hand up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Andaya. Just to follow up on Member Sword's concern, I hear what he's saying, and I too share his concern about the serious nature of what's happening at Red Hill, and perhaps one potential solution might be, I understand that we need the 2 weeks notice in order to have the public hearing. I guess what I would offer is that as a board member, I would be happy to call a special meeting. If it meant that we could provide the 2 weeks notice in the newspaper and then meet immediately to have the public meeting and then a special board meeting to vote on the approval, I would be willing to do so if that meant we could do it before waiting till the January meeting that's currently scheduled.
I guess for our board chair, that's a possibility. It'll probably end up then around the beginning of January.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm for that. I mean, that shortens it up. Because when you say waiting for the next board meeting, our next board meeting is like 4, if you count this week, it's like 5-6 weeks from now.
Actually, it's about 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, so no, I support that for emergency board meeting.
Let us discuss with the board chair and take a look at that option. But
we'll take a look at the calendar options.
But if we can get the board support in authorizing the public hearing, and we can go through that process. And
Yeah, so the date of the public hearing is not set. We'll do that as quickly as possible, even though it requires an additional board meeting, a special board meeting.
So I would just ask the board's consideration to be able to attend another meeting in early January.
Yeah.
Well,
A special meeting.
I'll make the motion to accept the resolution.
Okay, is there a second to accept this authorization for a public hearing to amend our CIP budget to install an additional monitoring well in response to the reported contamination of the Navy's Red Hill shaft?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. Madam Secretary, roll call vote, please.
Vice Chair Kapoor-Sproat,
Aye.
Board Member Maxor,
Definite aye.
Board Member Nalehu Anthony,
Aye.
Board Member Jay Hutai,
Aye.
Board Member Roger Babcock,
Aye.
Chair Brandon Daya.
Aye.
Chair, motion passes with 6 ayes.
Thank you very much. And we also recognize the presidents via WebEx, our board member, Roger Babcock. Moving on to the next item, we are on the items for information now. First up is Board of Water Supply Financial Update. Chair recognizes Mr. Joe Hooper.
Board Chair and board members. This is the financial update for 2021. Next slide, please. And this graph shows our actual versus our budgeted revenues over the past 6 years. Our actual are the blue bars, the budgeted are the orange bars, and then the line graph shows the variance between those budgets. You can see over the last 6 years that our budget variances have decreased from just over $23 million in 2016 to just under $300,000 in 2021. And so our variances have decreased dramatically. We're running much closer to our budget than we have in the past. Next slide, please. Our water demands are very dependent on our weather, and our winter months, January through March, are typically the wetter, and the summer months are typically drier. This graph illustrates that, where you can see the January, February, and March being over the red line, which is the normal rainfall, and then the summer months drying out. La Nina conditions are present over the Pacific Ocean. The transition to the wetter winter weather is consistent with La Nina conditions, and the National Weather Service is forecasting above normal precipitation from December through the spring. So that gives us some insight into what our water demand and revenues will be over the next several months. Next slide, please. Likewise, our water production is also highly dependent on the weather. Production generally starts to rise in April as we transition into the dry season, and then it drops again in the fall as the cool weather and rainy conditions occur. Next slide. And this slide shows our revenue. Our monthly revenue is the orange graph, which runs roughly in coordination with the rainfall models and the production models. It does lag because of our billing cycle. This does lag 1 to 2 months behind our actual production. Next slide, please. These slides show our delinquent commercial accounts. We monitor commercial customer delinquent accounts. The blue bars show a spike in delinquencies on the in the left-hand graph. The blue bars indicate a spike in the delinquencies due to the pandemic that began in April of 2020. And both the number of delinquencies in the commercial accounts and the balance in those accounts also increased, which you can see on the increase in the balance on the right-hand graph, where the blue bars again reach very high up beginning in the latter part of the year. And this is one of the effects that COVID has had on that. The red bars, however, show the 2021. And so those show that the delinquencies have decreased in this year to back to normal levels. And although the amount past due has also decreased, so that by October, actually, it was below the normal past due amount for delinquent commercial accounts. Next slide, please. However, unfortunately, residential delinquencies do tell a different story. The number of delinquent residential accounts did not increase so much during COVID, which is demonstrated on the left-hand graph, where you can see that everything is pretty much within line. However, the past due balance on those accounts did increase, as it's illustrated on the right-hand graph. This tells us that customers who were behind their bills before the pandemic grew further behind during the pandemic. Because we had a moratorium on water shutoffs for past due accounts, some customers may have seen little incentive to pay their water bills. There has been some relief that has flown through the Hawaii Utility Bill Assistance Program, Catholic Charities, and Council for Native Hawaiian Advancements, and others to help pay off some of these past due accounts. And we have received over 800 payments totaling nearly $850,000 to pay off past due residential accounts. As our economy emerges from the pandemic, and hopefully we're emerging from the pandemic, we have increased our collection efforts and also begun to turn off water on delinquent accounts, again, to give more of an incentive to people to enter into a payment plan to bring their accounts into a current status. Next slide, please. And then finally, this shows our carryover amount from prior years. Our net revenue requirement is the amount of rephrasing that, our net revenue is the amount of revenue we bring in minus our operating costs and capital improvement expenditures. And so any money funds that we have left over at the end of the year are carried forward to the following year and used to help fund our capital improvement program. As you can see from this graph, as we manage our budget more closely, our carryover amounts have decreased from around over $120 million in 2017 to under $40 million in 2021. And that next slide, that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Members, any questions? Hearing none, I've got a couple. Joe, going back to the graph regarding production, water production, total island potable water production.
Yes.
If I'm reading this line graph correctly, the difference between, for example, what we're pumping or producing now in December, January, from what we're going to need in the summer, for example, in June or July, the difference is about 40 million gallons per day. Is that the difference? Approximately?
Yes, going from the peaks to the valleys
Right.
to the peaks. Yes, it's about 40 million gallons.
Chair, keep in mind, yeah, I mean, that's from the lowest possible point to the highest possible.
Yes. So right now we're probably on the lower side, but in this summer we might need 40 million gallons per day more of water to.
I think it actually the green and red lines, which is the 5-year moving monthly average or the 30-day moving average, probably show from around 130 million gallons to around 150 million gallons is a difference of 20 million gallons a day. So I think on average, the difference between the winter and the summer is 20 million gallons. I think yes, if you want to go to the maximum from the wettest to the driest, then yes, 40 million gallons would be a more accurate interpretation.
So right now in Barry's report later on the status of groundwater levels at index stations, the November daily production was about 140 million.
I see. Okay.
But I think the point you're trying to make is that there is a difference in water usage from the winter months to the dry summer months.
Yeah, but somehow we have to make sure that we're able to produce the water
and to serve our existing customers
during the peak demand months.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My next question is going to the delinquent residential accounts.
Yes,
So for resident to classify between residential and commercial, condominium associations that are, let's say, on a single meter with all of the units, the apartment units, would that be under residential or commercial?
my understanding that is a residential account.
I see. Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Members, any other questions? Okay, hearing none, thank you for the report. Next item is the 2021 Customer Satisfaction Survey. Chair recognizes Ms. Becky Ward.
Aloha all, aloha Chair Andaya, board members and Board of Water Supply leadership. Happy to be here presenting the findings from our continuing tracking of resident perceptions and satisfaction with the Board of Water Supply. We can go on to the next slide, please. From a methodology standpoint, this is a study that began in 2015, and I think I have seen you folks on alternating years ever since. So this is the fourth wave. Traditionally, this was a telephone survey only. We have moved it to a mixed method, which is phone plus online, which is consistent with trends we're seeing in the marketplace, as you can well imagine. We conducted 675 interviews, well distributed across the island, very representative of the island's population. Margin of error is plus or minus 3.8%. And you see that we were in the field August 7th to September 1st with both the online and the phone component. So I am going to move through this fairly quickly because I know you have a lot on your plate, but there's some important data in here, I think, which is particularly important at this point in time. So if we can go to the next slide. Wanted to tell you the key takeaways and what I see. Satisfaction has definitely dipped in some areas, particularly related to affordability and fairness of rates, perceived fairness of rates. And this follows the discussion that you just had on delinquent accounts. Happily, satisfaction with providing safe and dependable water, those are strong and unchanged, and those are mission critical. Keep in mind throughout this the COVID experience, because a lot of these perceptions may have been impacted by the COVID experience over the past 18 months that seems like 18 years. There is strong trust, strong continuing trust in the board as a source of information about freshwater issues. This is even more important now. And we've got positive playback on conservation messages, your communications. So let's go on to the next slide. We're going to jump into it. The next slide looks at overall satisfaction. So overall satisfaction has dipped slightly. We look especially at strong satisfaction, and that's dipped among bill payers, but even more among non-bill payers. Strong satisfaction with your ability to keep water rates affordable has continued on a downward trend over the past few years actually. And in contrast, happily, strong satisfaction with the board's ability to provide dependable and safe water continues. So on the next slide, we see the data. So all of these questions are a 7-point scale. 7 is strong satisfaction and 1 is strong dissatisfaction. So we're looking at the teal parts of these bars. Overall satisfaction on a total sample basis has fallen since 2019, 63% then to 58% now. And if you look over in the right, There was a little bit of an increase in dissatisfaction, but there was also an increase in the don't know percentages. We need to keep an eye on this as we go through the data, because this is the first time we've seen maybe some impacts of people less sure, given COVID and given where they've been paying attention for the past 18 months or so. And as I said earlier, the non-bill payers is where the satisfaction has really been declining. Those are the bars down at the bottom of the slide. That's also where the larger don't know percentage appears. There's nothing in the data to explain why this might be happening, because we don't see the same pattern with your bill payers. And of course, your bill payers have access to more information through the bill. That might be a contributing factor, we're not sure. So some slippage overall here in overall satisfaction. On the next chart, please. These are perceptions on critical mission components, providing dependable water and safe water. Both of these 75 to 80% strong satisfaction, particularly important now when the community has the trust in you to maintain dependable and safe water. So those two, good news, strong, continuing. Down at the bottom, we start to see the affordability issue. And this is something I'll tell you in our experience that virtually all utilities struggle with. Perceptions of affordability rates. You see that the strong satisfaction peaked in 2017 and has been tapering off ever since. Now to where just 35% was strong satisfaction. There's another measure later showing fairness of rates, and that too has taken a hit. So if we go to the next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about customer service. Customer service is one of the aspects that first motivated our tracking. We've seen just half expressing strong satisfaction with customer service overall. And it's important to look at the bill payers because they are the ones with the more frequent interaction with you. There has been some decline there, but let's take a look at that on the next slide. So overall customer service. You can see the decline from 2019 to 2021, 64% to 53%, strong satisfaction. But here you can really see the increase in the don't knows. And that's part of this decrease. It's not all of it, but it's part of the decrease. We see bill payers with the same pattern. So a fall off from 69% to 60% currently. But again, we've got a larger don't know than we've seen in a while. Is this COVID? Is this less interaction with customer service? We really don't know. If we can go on to the next slide. Now we're looking at quality of water, very important components in delivery of the water service. We continue to see strong satisfaction in attributes related to the water itself, quality and taste of the water, as well as water pressure. The proportion that has strong satisfaction with the job you're doing to protect, manage, and sustain Oahu's water resources remain unchanged, thankfully. Strong satisfaction with your response to trouble calls has fallen off. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but largely due to an increase in the don't knows during COVID. Strong satisfaction with providing water to customers and having reliable service remain the same, which is great. And satisfaction with the job that you're doing, repairing, maintaining, and replacing has also remained fairly constant. So let's look at the next slide, please. So over on the left, there we go. The quality of the water. Very important, and there's strong satisfaction here at the 70% level. There is some slippage here, but it's not statistically significant, not anything to wave a red flag at this point. Water pressure has fallen off just a little bit, but again, not enough to cause concern. Taste of the water, just very minor and essentially statistically the same. Over on the right, how satisfied are you with the job the board's doing in protecting, managing, and sustaining? And that is constant to 2019. Both of these had fallen off some since the tracking began back in 2015. And this is an important one to keep an eye on. This is important because it comes to protecting Oahu's water resources. On to the next slide, please. And now we are looking at the delivery of water service. Providing water, we saw dependability earlier, strong. This is strong, 84% strong satisfaction. Reliable, yes, a little bit of slippage, but statistically not of concern. Fast response to trouble calls has fallen off dramatically, but so has the don't know percentage at the other end of the bar. So for some reason, and we've talked about this as we've reviewed the data earlier, you'd think if people were home, they might have seen more response in their neighborhood. We're not sure what's causing that, but certainly people feeling less familiarity with fast response to trouble calls. So we'll just keep an eye on this going forward. On the next slide, we're looking at the water system relative to repair, maintenance, and replacement. And this has been very consistent since we began tracking in 2015, 54% and 52% currently. I'm sure you'd like to see this a little bit higher, but it is constant. There has been no slippage at this point. On to the next slide, please. And now we get into the money section, the part where consumers talk back to you. Rates, bills, and cost of water service. Perceptions of the fairness of water rates, those have continued on a downward trend. It's difficult to know what consumers use to judge fairness, but I do believe that it goes hand in hand with perceived affordability. And then we ask about how affordable their rates are. Less than 3 in 10 said very affordable. So on the next slide, we have the data, and we've got strong satisfaction peaking with the fairness of water rates in 2017. And you recall that was the peak for the for the perceived affordability earlier. That's fallen off, but then the don't knows have increased. Again, interesting during COVID era, we've talked about customers' bills on a residential side. If they were home more, their bills may have been higher, and that may lead to some of this perception. Bill payers, we see the same kind of pattern where it peaked in 2017 and has fallen off somewhat since then, significantly so if we compare back to 2017. And then on the next slide is the perception of affordability. 2017 is when we started tracking this, and I think that corresponded to the year of some of the rate increases. So we wanted to start tracking it in advance of that. This perceived affordability has declined over time. And again, I would point to the don't know percentage. But we see the same pattern with bill payers, a little errata in 2019. It picked up some strong satisfaction, but 30% among bill payers currently. So as I said earlier, this is something that all utilities struggle with. And it is perceptual, and it is also tied to the person's own confidence about their financial situation. So if we can go on to the next slide. Next, we're going to talk about water conservation. This is an area where we've seen some good playback of messages that you have out in the community. 1/2 of the sample reported strong satisfaction with your efforts to inform them on how to conserve water and keep bills lower. It might be the keep bills lower part that suppresses this a bit because we see playback elsewhere of your conservation messages. A majority told us they've made some changes in their daily routines in order to conserve water, and we'll look at where those changes occurred. Relative to showers, fewer showers, and that's one of your messages. That's one of your TV ads. And this last bullet point, we ask a question about whose responsibility water conservation is. It's everyone's responsibility, but is, interestingly enough, slightly more so your responsibility. So on the next slide, let's take a look at the data. This is satisfaction with your efforts to inform residents how to conserve water and keep their bills lower. This has fallen off since 2017, not in a big way, but there is some fall off. And I am suggesting that's probably more related to keeping their bills lower than to just straight conservation. On the next slide, we asked a new question in 2021. In the past year or two, have you made any changes? And half said, more than half said yes, they have. And about those said shorter showers or fewer showers.
That's a good thing.
Is there a question about whether that's a good thing or not?
No.
And I would say that it's showers that I've seen really featured in your television advertising. So I see this as feedback on some of the messages you have out in your advertising. 20% say they water their yard less, 20% say they wash their dishes more efficiently, and you can look through the rest of that list. So important to start to track any behavioral change that's reported. Keeping in mind this is perceptual and self-reported, but that's important to track over time. On the next slide, we've got perceived responsibility, and this is a new question in 2021. Clearly, all of us, residents, government, businesses, we all have responsibility. You just have slightly more. That is it's your kuleana, it's your mission. The rest of us share it with you, but they do look to you clearly. On the next slide, we're going to look at community outreach and message recall. And this is an area that really has been impacted by COVID, as you could well imagine. Awareness of most of your community outreach activities did decline. However, awareness of your activities related to water conservation increased. So when some things are moving in one direction and another goes up, that's important. Something's going on there. So there have been declines in awareness of education programs in schools, of course, when you couldn't get out into the schools. And in fact, schools were not in session. Then there are questions regarding trust and who we trust as reliable and accurate information about fresh water issues. Strong trust in the board to provide this information. That's crucially important at this point in time. We saw a little bit less trust in the Department of Health, but the list bringing up the bottom is business leaders and elected officials as trusted sources of information on fresh water. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at awareness of programs and activities. On the next slide, please. Yep. So let's start with those circled areas. We've seen statistically significant declines in awareness of watershed protection, education programs in schools and communities. Some fall off in recycling, excuse me. We believe these are due to less visibility in the community, fewer community activities and events to appear at. But then if you look up at the top of the list, water conservation, awareness of your activities in water conservation has tracked up since 2017, dramatically so, very positive. And awareness of your activities related to repair and maintenance of the water system, really fairly constant. So as I said, when some areas decline and we can explain the reasons and others increase, these are important distinctions. So something's really working with the water conservation messages. And on the next slide, we will take a look at the sources of information that are most trusted to provide honest and accurate information. So scientists do top the list, and you can see that scientists have been growing in strong trust over the years since the tracking. We hope that were the case relative to all issues, but relative to freshwater issues, strong trust in the scientists. Board of Water Supply right below, or statistically even with scientists. And you see that trust in the board has been increasing over these years as well, since 2015. Again, crucially important at this point in time. UH has been sort of up and down the past few years, just slightly, but coming in at around 60% strong trust. Nonprofit environmental organizations picked up a little bit of trust here since 2019. State Department of Health has fallen off just a little since peaking in 2017. On the next slide are those at the bottom of the list. And they are at the bottom of the list of relative to trust. Elected officials trending downward, and distrust, unfortunately, trending upward. Business leaders falling off dramatically, down to 15% strong trust and 31% strong distrust of business. This is consistent with polling in many different areas over the years. So in summary, we do see continuing strength in your mission critical attributes, safe and dependable water. We do see some slippage in other areas. It's just unclear how much of that slippage has been due to our different experiences during COVID and what we paid attention to and what we didn't. We see strong playback of your conservation messages, very positive news. And we also see continuing trust in the board as a source of honest, reliable information about freshwater issues, crucially important right now. I would entertain any questions or comments.
So a lot to digest.
It is indeed. And I know I moved through it quickly, but I know there's a lot for you to discuss today. I am always around to discuss further if needed.
I think board member Anthony has a question.
Yeah, first of all, Becky, thank you so much for your time today and the effort you put into this. I'm curious, does this come with any sets of responses by any of the respondents that may have come up in the conversation with the folks doing the polling to indicate as to why they had strong feelings in any direction?
There are no set open ends, like why did you say that? The interviewers can record comments if someone feels particularly strongly, and I'd be happy to go back and see if we had any of those recorded. It is an interview that runs about 13 or 14 minutes, and we're careful not to try to take too much more of their time. But I'll go back and see if there were any comments entered. Sometimes people feel particularly strongly and the interviewers will record those.
Okay, and then, given the climate that we're in right now and the stakes that are as high as they are, pointing towards many of the data points that you've been tracking since 2015, what would be your recommendation to maybe have us think about what we can do to utilize, this kind of data in a way that might be more near term in terms of interacting with a group like this to see what's happening with respect to some of these indicators?
Let me make sure that I understood you correctly. You're asking about what the data says about your continuing communications at this point in time?
No, I guess what I meant to say was that because there are so many moving pieces right now with that, and we are, the word unprecedented is used daily at this point with respect to what we're seeing with contamination of an aquifer and service on the Navy side not being able to be continued for some customers. I would think that some of that affects just people's perception of water and the safety of water writ large. And I'm wondering as to whether or not we should consider, putting another pole in the field at an interval sooner than 2 years to try to track some of that so that we have data as to what we need to do with our community outreach and communications arms to counteract some of that.
We would certainly be happy to work with you on that. It's very useful when there's something of this magnitude to get a reading at the peak, and one hopes this is the peak. And then to be able to look down the road and see how things have changed over time, what kind of recuperation, perhaps, what kind of recovery, if there have been impacts that were immediate. So I think that's very well advised.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I would just also underscore the even greater sense of confidence that the board should have, knowing that the public sees them as a very trusted source. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Good point.
Becky, real quick, would it be fair to say, and I'm not sure how privy you are to our outreach efforts and our advertising, but would it be fair to say that what we do in terms of outreach and advertising has reflected in the results of the survey?
Absolutely. Both positively and negatively. Negative just because so much of the outreach was curtailed over the past 18 months, and we see the reflection of that in lower levels of awareness. And at the same time, the advertising messages are playing back, and we didn't ask an advertising recall question, but the messages are being played back in other ways. So yes, there is then positive reflection of those messages in the data as well.
Okay, thank you. So if it follows then that if we want to, for example, shore up some of the places where we've lost ground perhaps, or if there are other messages we want to emphasize, we should probably look at our communications and outreach
Yeah,
and adjust.
I think this is probably a good time to do that.
yeah, for example, in the area of water conservation, greater awareness right now, especially in the impact in water systems.
Okay, well, we'll definitely have to discuss internally. But thank you very much, Becky. We really appreciate the information and the data. And maybe we'll see you, maybe we won't wait 2 years to see you.
Thank you, Kapua. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to work with you. I will exit.
Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you all.
Mahalo.
All right, members, we are then going to move on to the next item here. This is the status update of groundwater levels at all index stations. Chair recognizes Mr. Barry Busagawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So there are 2 aquifer index stations in low groundwater condition as of November, and this is a change. Well, we have Kaimuki caution and Honolulu alert. If you recall, last month there were 4 in low groundwater conditions, so Proceeding and Waialua are out. So that's a good sign. The monthly production was 140 million gallons, as Manager Lau said previously. The if you could scroll down a little bit, thank you. So the rainfall in November was dry, so 39%, which brings a 5-month moving average to 77% of normal. So this year, the dry season extended quite a bit ways into the winter months, having abnormally dry conditions on the windward side, as well as moderate drought conditions on the leeward side to severe drought. But again, the National Weather Service is forecasting above normal precipitation for this month, as we had some good rains last week, so that was good. The presence of La Nina conditions are the cause, and they are forecasting above normal precipitation through winter into the spring. So we hope for a wet winter, get our aquifers recharged, getting ready for the following summer months. So the head levels are have stabilized a bit, and we should see that start to increase in the following months as well. So that's my report, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Members, any questions?
I have a question, Barry. What's the date range for this data? This goes up to when?
Not sure.
It's through the end of November 2021.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So it's a month lag on that.
Okay. So any modifications with Ernie folks turning off the Halava shaft and all of those effects won't be available until next meeting to kind of start to look at what that's doing to the total system.
Correct. Hopefully the demand will be lower because people are conserving, because the message is getting out that that we had to turn off one of our largest sources, in fact 3 of them. So we'll see how that goes, and as you folks were saying earlier, more importance on water conservation messaging going forward. And we are looking at expanding our water sensible program into the commercial space as well. So, and we intend to work with our communications office to, work toward defining and directing and targeting those conservation messages to specific types of categories of our customers to get the message out. So we shall see.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Then I have a question if members, you folks, don't have any more. Barry, in terms of the ones that are shut down right now, I'm just looking at the reports here. So does it correspond, which of these correspond to the ones that we have shut down? Is it Halawa, Moanalua, and one more?
Yeah, if you could scroll back up there, Joy, to the second page, please. It's rather small, but on the left there in the left column should have Halawa Shaft. So as of November, it was still on. It was showing 11, is that right? 11.6 million gallons. So it was pumping pretty high. So now Halawa Shaft is 0. Aiea and Halawa Well were also turned off mid-month. So in January, if it stays, you're going to see 0 there. So Aiea is, let's see it, in the middle column. Yeah, the middle column on the bottom there. Aiea Well is 1.19 and Halawa Well, which is split into 2 different systems, 0.67. So those 3 there are turned off.
I see.
Yeah.
And then for, when we mentioned at the current time that the Halawa Shaft supplies 20% of urban Honolulu's water, is that calculated by going 11.61 divided by the total Honolulu subtotal? Is that approximately?
I think we use probably an average of about 50 million gallons a day for Honolulu. And this month it was 63.
I see.
And then about 10 million gallons pumping out of Halawa Shaft.
I see.
So that's roughly about 20%.
Okay.
Yeah, the district totals on page 3. So if you scroll down, they may be there.
Yeah. Honolulu was 63 with import of about 20,000.
One more page there, Joy.
So Chair, what we're looking at is how do we keep our customers informed on how we're doing in the Honolulu water system, and also the Aiea Halawa water system, and converting some of these numbers maybe to graphs so they can see demand going up or demand coming down.
Okay. And then, is this available? I know it's in the part of our board packet, so it's
all of the information that's being shared today is actually on our website.
on our website. Okay.
Yeah. But we're looking at how do we communicate more effectively, especially to the Honolulu customers, community water system customers, and the Aiea Halawa water system customers.
Yep, I see.
And I just want to thank Board Member Anthony for all of his recommendations and his input, and thank you ahead of time, Aleku, for other input to this process.
All right.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention our operations, our water systems operations. They're the ones that having to shift pumping around, and we're helping them. But they have the responsibility to meet demand with the remaining sources that we have available to us. So I'd like to thank them. So
Yeah, definitely Kevin Ihu and his team there.
I see.
We're gonna have to watch this really closely.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
Chair, I have a question as well for Barry. Sorry.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you. Hi, Barry. Thank you so much, as always, for the very helpful information. I just wanted to follow up. So, you know, we've been watching Halava Shaft, we've been watching the Halava wells and IAEA. I know it's very difficult to predict, given that we're not sure exactly where the plume is or how it's moving. But are there other wells that we should be watching at this point, either in the Pearl City Halava complex or in Honolulu?
You know, those are the ones that have been identified going forward. Ernie, I don't know if you had others that you had in mind, but those are the closest to the Halava Valley.
Kapua, in the board action item number 2, Erwin's going to provide a presentation. We'll be kind of talking about why we decided to shut down secure Halava Shaft, IAEA wells and the Halava wells.
Okay, I can wait for more info. But on that, yep, I'll wait for that. But I definitely also want to recognize, Ernie, given all that's been transpiring over the last couple of weeks, I really want to mahalo and aloha both you as our chief engineer and Erwin for your folks' leadership on this, not just, and I should be very clear, not just for the last couple of weeks, but really for the last 8 years. We're really grateful for the vision that you folks have shared and the courage to speak truth to power and to, you know, keep us all apprised of this issue that's so very vital for Hawaii's water future. So thank you to everyone. And I know so many people are contributing, Kathleen and others as well, but I just want to follow everyone for your hard work on this.
Mahalo, Kapua. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I have a question about action item number 2. So, you know, the 24+ slides that were to go after the resolution, is that going to be in regular session, or is that going to be in executive session?
The slide presentation for action item number 2 is going to be a public session.
Okay, thank you. I think it's important that we get that on the public record and that folks get a sense of your perspective in totality and not just in some of the shorter sound bites that we've seen in the news. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was the intent.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Thank you very much. If there's no other questions? Okay, if not, moving on, water main repair report for November 2021. Chair recognizes Mr. Jason Nikaido.
Jason, you might be on mute. Okay, maybe we're having some technical issues. I can give the report if not, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for the month of November, we had 30 main breaks. Fortunately down from 45 from the previous month. You can see the red line in the graph that's showing that how we're tracking for the current year. 19 miles of pipelines were surveyed by the leak detection team in the month of November. And I'm sorry, I don't know how many leaks they found and were repaired.
Can you hear me now, Ernie?
Okay, go ahead, Jason. I just tried to pinch hit for you, but you're take it over.
Okay, so we had 74 leaks found by the leak detection team last month, and 54 of which were coupling leaks. So the other 20 were main leaks and service lateral leaks. And that concludes the report. Are there any questions?
All right, hearing none, thank you very much, Mr. Nikaido, for the report. All right, so that brings us to our executive session. Again, just a friendly reminder, and thank you for your patience, everyone. We're trying to kind of figure this out. We are going to have a Red Hill update in item number 2 at the end of the agenda today. So thank you for your patience. We'll have some slides and updates at that time. We'll go into executive session, and so let's take a short recess. Or actually, I think we need to move to go into executive session.
I think there
You have to make a motion.
Yeah.
So move.
All right, we have a motion to enter into executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, we are
It's-
going into executive session. Members, please use your link that was provided to you.
Chair, may I ask, I'm sorry, but I just want to, in case there are members of the public who are interested in wanting to watch the Red Hill update, do we have any sense of about how long the executive session should be so that people who are interested in watching the briefing can tune back in at an appropriate time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, let's answer that.
I think maybe around 4 o'clock might be, because we have about 4 action items actually.
Okay, so yeah, members of the public, if you'd like to tune back in at 4 o'clock using the same link that you have joined this regular session, we'll go ahead and do that at 4 o'clock. You can tune back in. Thank you very much. We'll stand in recess. All right, we are back on the record. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. I know it's situation is ever evolving. We'll try to adjust. We'd like to return now to our agenda, regular agenda. This was an item that we had passed to the end of the calendar. This is item number 2, requiring board action. This is to consider adoption of resolution number 931, 2021, regarding the Navy's Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility and associated water contamination issues. Chair recognizes Mr. Erwin Kawaka.
Thank you, board chair and members. I'd like to share the presentation for today's session. Everyone see that? Turn on my pointer. Okay, so what I'd like to do is first give an overview, kind of briefly go over some of the basics regarding our groundwater aquifer and talk about the things that make it so very special and important to our island. Then I'll go into some of the overview briefly. Many of you have heard and seen these before, so I won't spend too much time, but go over those and of course some of the more recent findings, and then take into a very quick discussion about the water contamination problems that's being experienced over at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. So just to kind of start, all of our drinking water starts as rain. It falls on the island and over time percolates through the island into the cracks and crevices of the subsurface geology. Our island, as you know, is volcanic in origin, so there are many cracks and crevices in which the water can exist within the subsurface. And a couple of things. I mean, the water is along the coastline. There's a geologic feature called a cap rock. It is a very dense, marine sedimentary layer that's very, very dense, and it actually holds back the water. It prevents it from leaking into the ocean. And this particular feature is the thing that enables us to have the kind of size of groundwater that we do have today. Fresh water being lighter than seawater floats above the salt water in the cracks and crevices of the subsurface geology. There are different ways of extracting the water. One is over the groundwater table at the very surface. It's called, in our case, the inclined shaft at Halava. There's deep wells where we can drill wells deep within this feature to pump water out. So these are the different kinds of ways that we can take water out of the aquifer. This particular feature is the only one of its kind. There is no other substitute on island. There is no replacement. It is the only one of its kind. And so in terms of the around the coastline, this cap rock feature here, as you can see here, we have a number of areas that large amounts of formation along the coast, and under it, as I shown in the previous picture, the freshwater lands that exist. This is a map of that the Water Commission uses to help manage and keep track of water withdrawals over the entire formation. And because of its large size that encompasses the entire island, it is subdivided to help make management and tracking a lot easier. As you can see here, there's some parts of the aquifer that can produce a lot of water, such as here, Waimalu, 45 million gallons per day. Other parts can only produce smaller amounts, such as here, Wailea East, at 2 million gallons per day. The Red Hill facility actually sits on the boundary of two very significant aquifers, namely Mauna Lua here and the Waimalu aquifer here. And this particular area here is the area in which produces probably some of the largest amounts of water sustainably over time. Many of you seen this. The Red Hill tanks are 20 of them standing on end, 250 feet high and 100 feet in diameter. Each one can hold 12.5 million gallons. The bottom of the tanks are located 100 feet above the groundwater table. This is a kind of a picture of the current layout. These are the 20 tanks here. This is the lower access tunnel. And we have H3 freeway here, the industrial park. And this is actually the Red Hill shaft. This is their infiltration gallery. It's essentially a cavern or a large opening or like a sump that's carved out of the basal rock, and all the water actually collects in there, and it's actually pumped out at large pumps over here in the pump room. And this lower access tunnel continues on to Pearl Harbor. It contains the pipelines that move fuel to and from Pearl Harbor, as well as the water pipe from the shaft to Pearl Harbor itself. So this picture shows our bored wells in close proximity to the tanks. We have our Halava shaft, Halava wells, Aiea and Aiea Gulch. Then here we have the Red Hill tank showing in black dots. Mauna Lua wells is to the south of the tanks, and we have Red Hill shaft, Navy's Red Hill shaft here, about a half a mile. For perspective, the stadium is here, and we have the Halava Industrial Park area here. So currently, Halava shaft, including Halava wells and Aiea wells, have been shut down. Halava wells, one of our largest stations, provides 20% of the water to metropolitan Honolulu. This is a map showing our metropolitan 180 low service system, and it shows you the extent in which it actually delivers from Mauna Lua area all the way to Hawaii Kai. And we do have other wells within this area that are now going to have to be pumped at higher rates to make up the loss that we are incurring as a result of shutting down, and a loss of about 10 MGD on average, or million gallons per day. In terms of studies, the Navy has done a lot, and under the administrative order consent that requires a look at the tank and all the different facets associated with it, one of the major concerns, and has been shown through the AOC, is the corrosion that's occurring on the backside of the tank. And the Navy's ability to find them and actually to repair them accurately is only 50% of the time. So that is a major problem because of the fact that there are going to be flaws that are going to get missed and could potentially grow in size and allow fuel from the inside of the tank to get out into the environment. The Navy has also done a number of studies in the past, an audit report that essentially validates what we know today with respect to releases to the environment, the amount of fuel that's in the subsurface, groundwater, and geology under the tank. The Navy was aware of all of this and actually did treatment studies as well as request additional water from the board in the event of the fact that the shaft itself couldn't be used because of release that impacted the Navy's water supply. Releases to the tanks is not unusual. The first recorded release happened in 1948. It was documented after an earthquake event, and a release of 1,100 barrels, which is about 46,200 gallons. So as far as part of the administrative order, 72 releases were actually recorded and documented under the administrative order studies. And if you think about the age of the facility, almost 80 years, that averages to about 1 release per year. There were subsequently, of course, after the January 14th, there were other releases and documented concerns about in recent times, and that caused either the Navy to shut down. There were some releases as a result of pressure surges, and the most recent regarding a fuel water mixture in the lower access tunnel. The Navy's assessment as to the probability of releases was also documented as part of the AOC. There were several. One that is most notable is this 27% chance of a sudden release between 1,000 to 30,000 gallons of fuel per year. And if you think about what has happened in recent times, it tracks very close to this, a 1 in 3 chance. With respect to the others, there are like greater than 5% probability of release more than 1 million gallons in the next 100 years. And while 100 years really seems like a long time, and 5% probability sounds pretty small, if you think about the consequence of these release on the groundwater aquifer itself, you want this probability to be as close to zero as possible, and the time required to take it from happening to be as long as possible. So in the circles of those that review risk assessment, these kinds of numbers here are very alarming to those who are familiar with risk probability and of this type. You know, Red Hill Shaft having contamination is not new. The Navy actually reported in their annual water quality report, the Consumer Confidence Report, detections of TPH diesel in 2018, as well as in last year or this current year, which reflects testing that was done in the previous year. Also, other kinds of contaminants associated with fuels have been reported in the Navy's water quality report. This is a current tracking of one of the monitor wells underneath the facility, and it's current only up to April of this year, but it continues to show the presence of fuel contamination, and the notions of degradation, natural decomposition of fuels in this particular area shows that it doesn't occur. And it's been validated from the regulatory agencies' experts on fate and transport of contaminants in the subsurface. This is a drawing of the monitor wells, the various ones that the Navy are currently testing. We have the H3 freeway up here. Halawa Shaft is located up to the northwest, about a mile. And what you want to take note here is that while the Navy wants to say that they've drilled a lot of monitor wells, which is, true, all of them are within the property boundaries. They don't really tell you much about what's going across the valley. We've always asked the Navy to install more monitoring wells across the valley. And yes, it is recognized that this area is challenging in terms of very much developed. There's a quarry here. There's very few places to put in monitor wells. And so those that are in here that we can put in, no matter how few, helps to provide us data that currently doesn't exist. This is some most recent data. And what's really interesting here that I wanted to just kind of illustrate is that we have monitor well number 2, and it shows, continual detections of different kinds of petroleum constituents. And we have Red Hill Shaft. And what's interesting here is that we have this reported non-detection occurring here, but then we have a lot of detections starting from July all the way through August of this year, almost on a weekly basis. And so this idea that potentially a problem could be existing at Red Hill Shaft is pretty much reflected in this data here that started around July of this year. one of the things that's always been trying to understand is what is the flow of groundwater through this particular area. And while it's commonly understood that groundwater moves predominantly from the mountain to the ocean, or Mauka to Makai, there is lots of evidence show that there is cross valley flow, that water can flow from this facility towards across the valley. And of interest to us is our own Halava shaft. And water level surveys done in 2018 actually validated this in terms of seeing changes in water levels as a function of changing pump flow rates. This is an actual, what is called a particle track map that came from the Navy's current groundwater flow model report. And in it, it depicts what happens to particles of contamination starting at the tank and where do they ultimately go based on certain conditions. In this one, it's Red Hill shaft is off and Halava shaft pumping at 12 million gallons per day. And these white boxes over here is the Navy's redaction of their own sources. This one is Red Hill shaft, and this is Aiea Halava shaft. And this one over here, it's labeled Halava shaft number 1 and 2. It's not really crystal clear to us what this is, but we do have our Halava wells and Aiea wells in this particular area. And what's striking about all of this is that it all passes through Red Hill shaft on its way either through Halava shaft or our Halava wells here and Aiea wells here. And so this is the reason why we took the precautionary measure to shut down our wells. This particular report came out in March of 2020. It's available online at the EPA's website and is currently under review by the regulatory agencies who have indicated that they expect to submit their final comments on this report by the end of this year. Water contamination at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, as everyone knows, started on the November of the 28th. There were subsequently actions taken by the Navy and by the board by the Navy, shut down Red Hill shaft, and as far as the board, shutting down Halava shaft. And of course, the kinds of detections that have been reported since then, both as high as 920, and most recently, Department of Health test results show that at the Red Hill shaft, they detected levels as high as 140,000 TPH diesel. So these are all the kinds of data that was used in response to take the actions that we did. And for all practical purposes, for the purpose of, reducing, while we're pumping, we can draw this contamination to our sources faster. But at the same time, because we don't want to draw it to our sources and prevent this contamination from entering our pipeline system, whether it's coming or not, we effectively have shut down to prevent any of that from happening. And so the chances of actually being able to pump going in and pump Halava shaft again are pretty slim in our view. As everyone knows, the Department of Health issued an emergency order to defuel the tanks. There's some interesting comments being made by the Navy about that, and the Department of Health is going to be hearing.
Sorry, Erwin, I don't mean to interrupt, but something really caught my attention.
Okay.
On the previous slide, you mentioned something about the chances of us ever pumping from our Halava shaft again. Could you repeat that?
Sure. If you think about contamination here, all right, the reason why you want to stop pumping at Halava shaft is to slow down the migration of contamination coming over, right? That's one reason.
Yeah.
The second reason why we're doing it is that when contamination does reach here, we want to prevent it from entering our water distribution system, because otherwise you're going to generate the same situation as being experienced at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, where customers are going to experience this in the tap water. So because you want to prevent both things from happening, both entering into the water system and reaching Halava shaft, if you think about the ability to pump this station in the future, the question has always been, will we ever be able to pump Halawa Shaft in the future? The likelihood of that is happening is very small because we want to prevent those two things from happening. And the one that we really want to prevent happening is pumping any kind of fuel contaminated water into our pipeline system, because once it enters that pipeline system, it is very difficult to remove. And of course, once it reaches the aquifer, it is equally difficult to remove because, as you know, the subsurface is porous and it's irregular. And once it attaches to the subsurface rock, it is extremely difficult. So the likelihood of this ever being able to pump again in the future, based on those two pieces of information, the likelihood of that happening in the future is small. Did I clarify that?
It does. So let's say even if the Navy did defuel all of the tanks, as ASAP,
Mhm.
would that still be the case that?
Well, defueling does one thing. Defueling takes away the fuel that's there and reduces potentials for further damage to the aquifer. So defueling is important because there is still 187 million gallons stored here, and that removing that removes the chance of further degradation to the aquifer itself. So that's
So
important to do.
that's removing a huge risk
Right.
for future leaks, perhaps even
Now,
larger leaks.
that's correct. But we know there has been a release already. So this is about managing degradation, further degradation to the aquifer. Because the more that gets released, the more difficult the situation becomes. And the potential for even being able to treat and restart, such as our Halavo, Shaft, and other wells, gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So defueling is an integral part to reducing the potential for further degradation.
But even
We
if they
know there's something. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
but
sorry.
even if they defuel, you still have what's already
That's right. That's
in.
correct. That's correct. And that's one of the challenges right now, is to understand how much has been released already. Now,
And
whether it's yeah, go ahead.
and
I'm sorry.
also we know where is it moving with the underground deep in the aquifer. So that's also kind of characterizing the contamination plume and determining its direction of flow. A critical piece will be the Aya Halava Shaft, Navy's Aya Halava Shaft. They had the preliminary hit of 920 parts per billion TPH as diesel. And they've kind of tried to walk that back. Even a couple hours after they shared that with myself and the Deputy Director of Health. So the Health Department took additional samples, and hopefully we'll see the test results. If the test results indicate the presence of TPH petroleum in that Aya Halava shaft, then I think it almost like validates some of the particle tracks here, but it also gives us concern about how quickly things may have moved. So that's a very important piece of information that we've requested the health department to share as soon as they get the results.
Okay, thanks for letting me interrupt.
Yeah.
Please,
Okay,
please.
no problem.
Good question. Thank you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. So in summary, we have a number of our wells that have been shut down. It's certainly a loss to our water system. And it's a concern. Continued storage of the fuel above the aquifer continues to endanger the resource from further contamination. So relocation of this fuel away from the aquifer is really the most logical and best thing to do at this point. And I'll open it for any questions.
Members?
I have a couple questions to start off. First, thank you, Erwin, for that incredible distillation and explanation of really complex material in a really accessible way. Personally, this is even more troubling for me now, having all of this information and thinking about how to move forward. both personally and then also, I mean, and not even for our board and for our customers, but really for Oahu's water future, right? And so with that in mind, I guess my first set of questions centers around the information that we need about where the plume is. Do we, and to me, I mean, I'd love your guidance on that. To me, I see that in two ways, both information now from the Navy with respect to the contamination levels in its wells, and then what additional monitoring wells would be necessary to supplement that info. So can you provide any additional guidance on that?
Sure, the monitor well that we're going to install is we want to install is a necessary first step. Yes, the Navy did install a monitor well there, but by having our own, we can access it when we want and sample it as often as we want. The next step after that is looking for another place across the valley to install another monitor well. The presence of the quarry makes it extremely challenging. The terrain also is very challenging to get a drill rig into this area. And we've spent the first, we spent 3 years talking to the owners of the quarry, talking to landowners there, looking at the terrain, and it's extremely challenging. But the way we see it is that there are other locations that we can install monitor wells, such as the one by the animal quarantine station. That one is still in the hopper as the state moves to potentially redevelop that area. We've asked their design consultant to keep that place open for us so that we can install a monitor well. A monitor well close to Halawa Shaft. It also makes sense on our property. We had originally planned to do that to help characterize the North Halava Valley fill. That's something that's a logical next step for us. And in between there, I know the state has like a maintenance road back there, but we had looked at that and trying to get a drill rig in there would be very difficult. But the search continues. We've even looked inside of the Halava Industrial Park, actually talked to some of the business owners and whether we can drill a monitor well in their parking lot across the valley. So that continues too, but it is very slim. The other place is the correctional facility parking lot is another place that we had looked about installing a monitor well. So we're going to aggressively revisit those and see if any of them can actually produce a result for us where we can install a monitor well.
But how many do we need total, Erwin? So you mentioned, 5, maybe 6 spots depending. Is that enough? I mean, my understanding of where there's been monitoring of petroleum contamination in other areas is that it's significantly more monitoring wells.
That is correct. We need something on the order of 50 to 75 wells to help characterize the three-dimensionally, the width, the length, and the depth of the plume. Of course, the more that we have, the better. Places like Albuquerque, for example, they've drilled over 200 monitoring wells, and their data really helps to really clearly characterize the size of the plume three-dimensionally, and that's an ideal kind of condition. Unfortunately, we have already in this area terrain and existing infrastructure in the area that complicates the ability to install that number of monitor wells. So having said that, strategically putting them in the right place is the next step. Making sure that we look at it, have our geologists, groundwater models give us some feedback on targeting the best place to put them because we have so few we can install.
And so, but you're saying maybe we would need 50 to 75 monitoring wells?
Ideally, but currently the terrain and the existing development in the area doesn't allow us to do that.
How much is that per well?
We're looking at anywhere from $1 million to $2 million per well, depending on the depth.
So a couple of I think this is gonna be a discussion with the Department of Health and the EPA and the Navy. I just met the EPA person that's on the ground for this emergency. And that was a good first meeting. I think he kind of expressed the need for more data and information on what's happening underground. And a really closer look at the Navy's groundwater models to make sure that they are realistic and not trying to portray a situation that is more ideal to the Navy's interests.
Right, and just one, and I'm sorry for all the questions, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around
Yep.
this. So my limited understanding of this is, you know, maybe at best it could take us 8 months to drop a well with the permitting and other things that are required. So what, but the fuel's moving now.
Right.
So what do we do in the meantime to be able to get the information to make the on the ground decisions to keep the community safe?
The only thing we have is to use what's there now. So the Navy's wells, strategically select the ones that make the most sense, that tell us about what's actually headed or what's actually coming off of the property. That's the only thing that we can rely on right now.
And to also have them test more frequently instead of quarterly, do it monthly or even weekly. Because it depends on the speed at which the groundwater is moving to, the plume could pass quickly.
Right, but they're monitoring it. I mean, is the Department of Health or I mean, how can we get access to our own?
That's the
monitoring
next, yes,
well?
that's the next step, requesting our ability to access and monitor those wells and collect our own samples and analyze them. We've asked that before. This is not the first time we've asked. We've asked as far back as 2015. And the Navy has always been reluctant to do it, concerned about what we might find or not find.
Reluctant or denied?
Um, we had made requests and we got no response. And when we spoke to them, they said, no, we'll give you the data.
Erwin, I just, that tickled my brain again. It kind of dropped from my memory in the short term. I do have to look at that email from the Navy that maybe opens up maybe potential opportunity.
Yeah, very recently, the Navy has,
a few days ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to explore that some more and really push the envelope on that.
There is some group called what is it called? The Aquifer Recovery Working Group.
Right. Yes.
That the Navy has convened. And we are participating in that process. Erwin is our representative to that group.
Is it too late to include that in the resolution to request access to the wells?
The Navy might be open to allowing us some limited access. So
or no need?
Maybe I would just leave the resolution as a current form. I think the important point about the resolution is it really states a position about moving the fuel away.
Okay.
And that is our biggest issue right now is, I think the handwriting on the wall is pretty clear about the situation, that this fuel has issues. And more recently, recent history, I think it's been one event after another that's occurred, even in the last, this year and late last year. So we need to encourage the Navy to just make the decision, get the fuel out of there, and studies and dialogue can continue, but at least the large risk to our aquifer is removed. We can now focus on identifying where the contamination is, the nature and extent of the contamination already in place in the aquifer, and where it's moving. Erwin, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's correct.
So board, we also included a draft resolution for board's consideration.
Actually, Ernie, I just have a couple of follow-up questions as well, if there's time for it.
Sure.
Yeah, Erwin, thanks so much for the detailed information. And I know because of the lack of the data points, some of this might be a little hard to answer, but you know, and so I guess my first question is, we're still waiting for all this data back from the Navy, right? Like some of this stuff has been delayed. And so with that, can you just speak to the size of this aquifer? And like, what are we talking about in terms of scale and scope of this particular aquifer and the potential for this plume to move?
Let me go back to my slides. Sorry for this. So this is where the Red Hill tank is located. This is the side, or this is the administrative area that's managed, or the commission has identified as the Waimalu sector, and then we have Honolulu. The area of interest to us includes all of our wells in this particular area. And if groundwater is moving across the valley, we're talking about this particular area here. It's really unclear at this point, based on the available, what's the actual extent or the size. I think for now, we can use our wells as kind of like an initial guide as to the size of concern. Certainly a mile across the valley, which is where our Halava shaft is located, and to the west, as far over to our Halava and Aiea wells, would be the immediate area of concern. And because the groundwater is kind of moving in this particular direction, this is the area of concern that we're currently looking at. But again, this is all approximation. There's still not enough data to really characterize the extent of the plume and its direction.
I just saw, Honolulu, if you look at this graphic here, the Waimalu sector or hydrologic unit, the estimated sustainable yield is 45 million gallons a day. So it's a pretty productive area. The only larger area would be the Waipahu Waiava
This one here.
sector or hydrologic unit, which is, I think that is what, I can't read it, 100.
105.
105 million gallons a day. Maybe we can go back to the particle track model results.
Can I say one thing though, while we're moving, Ernie and Erwin, those are just lines on a map though. There are no
Yes.
boundaries. Those are
Yes,
administrative
that's correct.
management lines only.
That's
Just for
correct.
management purposes.
There is no distinction between Waipahu
That's
Waiava and
correct.
Halava or anything
That's
else,
absolutely
and that's what
correct.
we keep in mind.
And we've been saying that, you know, they're all connected.
Right.
So on this particle track, Erwin, maybe it's a little hard to read, but if you go to the leftmost area, can you read off what we're?
Yeah, this one says Pearl Harbor Springs at Kalawao near Aiea. And then this other one here says Kalawao Stream above Cam Highway at Aiea. So
Okay, so and then the caveat here is this is the Navy's model results for some particle track model runs from 2020. We still haven't received the final comments from the EPA and Department of Health on this effort. So there is probably some degree of uncertainty. But the Kalawao Springs area, I think that's near Pearl Ridge.
So in some of the data that you shared, Erwin, there was that red circle around some of the elevated levels above what the legal limit was. And I guess the question is like, so all the way back in July, right? With 370 and 480, and
yes,
and I guess how come that didn't ring the kind of alarm bells that
I don't know.
right now?
I don't know.
We don't know.
We
No.
don't know. I mean, it's if I saw numbers like that, I would say something. I mean, historically, I looked at this data uh, uh, prior to this date, and they all look like this, what's considered non-detect. Although, I would strive to try to get detection limits much lower than that. But having said that, prior to this date, it all looked like this. All of a sudden, it went like this. Yeah.
When did we have access to this?
This was very recently, only
Late
within the
November.
last, yeah.
Late November. So
Yeah.
the Department of Health only got this data in late November.
Yeah.
Also, and and then somebody informed us that it was available on the DOH website, so
Right.
Aaron pulled it down and looked at the report. But you can also see, going back to 2020, they've already started to get detections of oh no, I'm sorry, that's not the monitoring well.
Yeah, this is monitor well number
That's
2.
not their drinking water source. Red Hill Shafter is their drinking water source, so.
Yeah.
If this happened to like our halal chef upon the first number, Erwin would be in my office and telling me or calling me on my cell phone, even if it's on the weekend or at night, he'd be giving me, sounding the alarm bell and recommending securing the source. Is that correct, Erwin?
That's correct.
So, thank you for that. The last question I have is, and I know you mentioned Albuquerque in terms of monitoring that plume that exists there, but
Mhm.
who has the kind of expertise that is needed? I know that like in the Star Advertiser today, they have divers down in the Red Hill shaft trying to skim the water off and pumping it out.
Yes.
What are the options now that we are certain that there is contaminants in this aquifer? What are our options to fixing it, and who has the expertise to actually bring that to fruition?
Well, at this point, I think, well, right now the Navy's trying to remove whatever they can see that's floating on the water or adhering to the subsurface within Red Hill Shaft. So that's number one. But the other concern is what gets dissolved into the water. That's really the primary concern to me, and what those numbers are, what those levels are, and whether they're even treatable. Something like 140,000 in my mind is extremely difficult to treat and remove down to zero or non-detectable, because this is the threshold according to Department of Health for taste and odor of fuel is 500. So at this level, you can be able to smell it. But there are previous to this, Department of Health had a threshold of a 100. California, Minnesota have the same threshold. At 100 micrograms per liter or parts per billion, you can smell fuel in the water. So any kind of treatment would have to take it well below that 100. And even at that, I think there could be lots of concern with respect to that particular water supply. So,
And I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't think this is a fair question to ask, but like
that's okay. I'll
I
try.
heard Friday's call with the Senate and with all the legislators on Friday saying the Navy was saying like, oh, we want to get our people back home by Christmas, and I've heard Ernie talking about whether or not there's going to be enough water in the summer when they're the drier months and usage goes up, and so if you could, like, can we talk about a range of what we think it takes to start to fix some of this, to get to the levels that you're referring to, if we're at 120,000 now, understanding that there's a huge denominator here that we don't know, which is number of gallons that are actually discharged.
Honolulu, I think what I said at the press conference earlier today is that we don't know. The Navy's going to attempt, and they've talked about bringing in activated carbon contactors to filter the water through. We'll find out when they try to filter the water where the levels are extremely high. If the water that comes out on the other side of those contactors will be low enough to be considered safe to drink. So that will be a test. Erwin, Do you think that treatment of the levels that are in over 100,000 parts per billion of TPHO, yeah, if
Yes,
that's even treatable?
it's difficult. I'll tell you now, that's difficult. You not only have to contend, even if you use activated carbon, you have to deal with activated carbon that has fuel on it. And if the amount there that renders the activated carbon and defines it as hazardous waste, now disposal becomes a challenge. So it's difficult.
And if the carbon is able to remove the fuel from the water, how long will that carbon last before you have to change it out?
Change it out.
Because, you know, Aaron has direct experience, and we have direct experience with over 30 years using activated carbon to remove legacy pesticides from pineapple cultivation. And we know that, you know, we may need to change up the carbon on an annual basis. And, you know, we go through 1 million pounds of carbon a year. Now, with these high levels of fuel or fuel and water, how will the performance of the activated carbon systems actually work? You know, will the carbon have to be changed out really frequently, or will it be able to last? Or like you also mentioned about how do you dispose of that carbon that has been spent, been used up to remove the fuel from the water? What do you do with it? How do you handle that? So it could become a nightmare. Uh, uh, It'll be interesting to see how the Navy, you know, proceeds. I mean, they're already trying to fly in equipment and tanks and activated carbon to see how it performs. Hopefully, they've, you know, done some science and engineering to figure out what works.
But,
So,
I mean, hasn't this not worked so far in Albuquerque?
Yeah, Albuquerque's case, they're dealing with a different contaminant, ethylene dibromide, so it's a smaller compound. Their subsurface geology also is conducive to soil vapor extraction or ventilation. But even at that, their removal rates are marginal at best. And so for them, the contamination did reach the drinking water well. And for them, they have to actually treat that drinking water well with activated carbon to remove it. But I think at this point, I think their option, the last time I had heard was they were considering abandoning that well and looking for another source rather than treating it.
yeah, and many years ago, Erwin and I actually saw that well, visited the utility and saw firsthand what they're dealing with. They are over 25 years dealing with that issue.
So back to the original question and the answer, it's difficult. It is a challenge based on the information that's available. The Navy is certainly trying different alternatives, and it'll be interesting to see their ability and how successful they are. But from our vantage point, the real concern is how much is actually dissolved into the water and what that concentration level is. The larger the concentration, the greater the challenge.
And where has it flowed underground
That's
in the
right.
aquifer?
So when we hear in the news that they're gonna take these really large activated charcoal filters and push 26 million gallons through, there's hope that they're gonna suck it all up, but what you're saying is that it's in the rocks and there's it's stuck to the surface of what's contained in the aquifer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Erwin, is there any way to clean that?
With our geology, soil vapor extraction, I've talked to some people that have actually used it because our geology is so porous. Um, soil vapor extraction efficiency is really low under those kinds of conditions.
So the best avenue going forward is prevention. Prevent any more contamination of the aquifer through the removal of the fuel from the tanks and pipelines. And having to maybe relocate those to other locations, not over our aquifer.
Okay.
But given that, Ernie and Erwin, wouldn't permanent removal be a better solution?
Yes, actual taking the fuel and removing it away from the aquifer. Yes. Storing it in above ground tanks along the coastline over the cap rock areas. Reducing that chance of additional fuel from potentially getting released, whether it be from the tank or the pipeline or the facility itself. It's just removing the chance further additional quantities of fuel being released in the future and allowing that to migrate to the groundwater because it's cumulative, right? With each release.
I totally agree with Aaron's recommendation.
And is that reflected in the resolution? I think it talks about a long-term solution that involves relocating the fuel away from the aquifer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's consistent, Chair.
Okay.
But to clarify, couldn't we just say immediate and permanent removal?
It's the pleasure of the board if they want to amend the resolution. So if you want to make it clear.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, just to clarify.
On the first be it resolved on page 2, it does say that the board supports ceasing the use of the Red Hill facility and the immediate removal of the fuel while
Yeah.
investigating alternatives.
Oh, you know what, Ernie? I may be looking at an old version. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there is some confusion. It's my bad, couple of, there is a kind of a revised version of the, what was posted on
Apologies.
the website. Joy, can you bring up on the screen, the latest version of the resolution?
Just for clarification, so what we adopt today, does it have to be an exact? If after the meeting we need to wordsmith it, would that still be permissible, or once we approve it, it's set in stone?
I defer to your attorney on that.
Jessica, are you available?
Yeah, Brian, I think if you approve it today with board vote, that's the form you're going to have to go with.
The exact wording.
Yes.
I see.
So couple on the screen as the first be it resolved, be it further resolved, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would suggest that be immediate and permanent removal of the fuel while investigating alternatives. I see the second be it resolved as well, which is, I apologize, that was different from what I had.
Yeah, that was my errors. Control.
I would agree with the vice chair. You know, to Erwin's point, I don't know that, I don't know that they're going to be very effective in skimming all this oil out of there if no one is certain that nothing else is leaking. And the only way that we can be certain that nothing else is leaking if there's no fuel in those pipes or in the facility above.
That is true.
Board Chair, may I add to that?
Yes,
Thank you.
go ahead.
What we also need to recognize is that any fuel that is already in the vadal zone above the aquifer that's available for further release into that aquifer. So there's an unsaturated, rock geology that's underneath the tanks just above where the groundwater aquifer is. So any fuel that's in there, right where the shaft is, even if you clean up the shaft, is available for further migration towards the water.
Into the shafts
Oh.
again.
That's something that we need to keep in mind. And, that's something that I'd like to hear more about in terms of how the Navy proposes to address that. Thank you.
Yeah, good point, Aaron. In the meeting I attended with the Navy status meeting, I raised that question of what's happening in the unsaturated or vadal zone between the lower access tunnel and the top of the water table. All that 100 feet so of lava rock that fuel had to pass through to get to the shaft at the water table in the aquifer. And there's probably still, like Aaron said, fuel still in transition through that zone.
Is there any way to test that, Ernie? Or do we just, we're sitting and waiting for it to drip into the drinking water?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's even possible, like say, boring into that vadal zone and trying to capture or extract fuel if you can find it. Ern, I don't know if that even makes sense.
I agree. I mean, there were soil vapor cores that were done underneath the tanks back in 2002, in the late 90s. A similar doing another core right above the infiltration gallery in the lower access tunnel would be beneficial to characterize what's in that vadal zone, if any.
But so I'm understanding you correctly, Erwin, the fuel has to pass through the vadal zone in order to get to the groundwater.
That's correct.
And so, but we have no idea whether it's all seeped out at this point or whether it's still in there and leaking. So even after all of the fuel is removed from the tanks, we're still gonna have to
That's
deal with the
correct.
cleanup from the vadal zone.
That's correct. But even if
it-
you remove the fuel from the tanks, at least it reduces what more you can add to what's already there, right?
Yeah, that's going to dissolve it to the aquifer, to the groundwater. Keep in mind too that natural rainfall percolating through the rock from above, because you're under a ridge that has gets occasional heavy rains. The natural rainfall moving down toward the groundwater can also help to move fuel downward into the groundwater or into their shaft. Aaron, did they mention December the Kona storms created a lot of infiltration, rainwater infiltration
Yes.
into the tunnel?
Yes. They had mentioned that the storms that we had created a lot of infiltration in the lower access tunnel and prevented some scheduled tours for that particular day.
Just to be clear, as far as the cleanup, so the carbon and everything is coming in, but in the meantime, all the water that's coming out of people's taps, the 93,000 or so folks that are affected by the system, is that just going into the storm drain?
That's our understanding. We don't have a clear picture as to how the Navy is doing their flushing, but that's our understanding. And we understand the Navy had purchased some carbon filter units to attach to the hydrants to try to remove any dissolved fuel prior to it getting released to the storm drain through their flushing.
So we could be spreading the problem through the storm drain system. Or they could,
Yes, we could be. And I think the Department of Health has already raised that concern with the Navy, the Clean Water Branch.
right, because those releases should have to be permitted, right? To
Yes,
make
that's
sure they're
absolutely
being
correct.
appropriately treated.
So the Water Commission is also in discussion with the Navy with respect to how much they want to pump from Red Hill Shaft and how it relates to their permitted use.
Right. Yeah, that was another related question that I had because do you know what their permit is right now for pumping? On a daily basis?
No, I don't know what it is.
I'm just curious because some of the numbers I've heard thrown around in the press, maybe on the order of 20 million gallons or more, but I would suspect that
That's
would exceed their permit.
yes, that's far greater, I believe.
I believe that might be higher than their permitted water use, or their water use permit. Board, we continue to engage and kind of listen in on these progress meetings. And we can brief you as as time goes on, as we learn more about what is being done. So they have twofold issues, one addressing the aquifer, the contamination, the source, and perhaps the groundwater contamination. And then the other issue is how do you clean up their water system, the pipes and people's homes that received this petroleum contaminated water. How do you restore that back to a condition that that will be safe for the people to occupy the homes again? It is a very large area of impact, and we've heard that the Navy has set aside like 800 to 1,000 hotel rooms to handle families that are displaced because they don't have clean drinking water in their homes, and now they're living in a hotel room or something. It's a very sad and difficult situation, especially this time of the year. Any other questions, Board Chair?
Any other questions? Or should we move to adopting the resolution?
Maybe just one other thing, Mr. Chair, and I know that the delegation has been very active in this and that they are, taking our cause to the federal level, especially in and around the military. I'm wondering if this body would entertain urging Congress to engage as well.
Chair, would the board consider maybe that also maybe another be finally resolved that copies of this resolution be transmitted to our Hawaii congressional delegation?
Yeah.
Or to the president or the secretary of defense?
Yep.
Are you guys open to that? Just a thought, at the very end of the resolution, that either trying to resolve that copies of this resolution be sent to the president, the secretary of defense, and our Hawaii congressional delegation. Would that be the proper wording?
I would be open to that, but I'm just, thinking about what Board Member Anthony suggested. I think what he suggested goes beyond that, right? If we're looking at congressional action, I guess what I'm thinking of is something on the order of Kaho'olawe or other areas where there's been significant commitment and cleanup, where there's been contamination from the Freds. Or to urge Congress to pass legislation to take action, something like that. I don't know.
I'm just throwing out this idea, and I beg your forgiveness if I misspeak. But Another way could be to request the congressional delegation to appear before this board to update the board on actions they're taking at the federal level to address the problems. I mean, I don't know if that's too bold.
I think it'd probably be better to request a meeting of some sort as opposed to requiring them to appear before us.
Okay. I mean, I'm just throwing that out, Chair. You should know better than me.
Yeah, we don't want to summon them, but or to urge them to act within their own, auspices, to urge Congress to pass legislation to address the issue and fund the cleanup. I mean, if we're looking at 50 to 75 monitoring wells at $1 to $2 million a pop, to me, that's not something that our ratepayers should have to shoulder because other folks have contaminated the aquifer. And I think we need to look at long-term solutions. I think we need to be active. And part of the reason, and I apologize for all the questions, but this is happening now in real time. And given that we only meet once a month, I want to make sure that we can address as many of these critical issues right away in order to, ensure that action can be taken.
I believe that the 50 to 75 additional monitor wells should be installed and paid for by the Navy. And not the Board of Water Supply, but we're gonna start with a few just to get the ball rolling here.
Maybe we can amend this to reflect what Kapoor's comments regarding legislation and funding. And if anybody would like to volunteer to craft the wording, by all means.
To Vice Chair's point about us being in the middle of this right now, I think it's especially after the sobering discussion with Erwin just a few minutes ago, we were forced to think about scale and scope in a different way. And what that means to me is like, there are very, very different theories happening right now in real time as to what the risk is. And some would have us believe that, the military residents will be home by Christmas, which is, which sounds ambitious to say the least. It's less than 2 weeks away, and there are no charcoal filters on the ground yet. And then at the same term, we're talking about other scenarios where they've had to abandon aquifers and look for new sources of water, and also look at some of the long-term effects of the fact that we still may be leaking contaminant into this aquifer, which means that we are on a very, very long journey. And I think it's important for us to get this right out the gate. Ernie and Erwin, you guys have been, I've only been on this board for a year. You guys have been sounding the alarm since 2014. You have obviously put thousands of hours into this, and what you had hoped would not happen is happening right in front of us right now. And unfortunately, the Board of Water Supply is going to be subject to all of the decisions that get made right now. The speed at which they're made, the depth and breadth at which funding is available, and the timeline for that as well. Because at the end of the day, Ernie, it's on your shoulders to give more than 1 million people water on this island, and that weighs very heavily with me as a board member and as a former employee all those years ago. But certainly, as we look at this, this is way outside the scope of any budget that the Board of Water Supply has.
I agree.
Thank you for that, Board Member Anthony. And at our chair's suggestion, how about something like this, just to throw it out there? As the last be it resolved before the be it finally resolved, have it be it further resolved that Hawaii's congressional delegation is urged to introduce legislation directing the Navy to develop and implement a plan to decommission the Red Hill bulk fuel facility and the facility's underground tanks, and to appropriate funds for the Navy to implement that plan, semicolon, and which would take us into the final, be it finally resolved.
That sounds pretty good. Just for another consideration, do we want them also to implement also the immediate identification and cleanup of contamination that may already exist in the aquifer from this facility?
I would accept that friendly amendment. Thank you, Ernie.
I'm not a board member though, so.
That sounds great. I mean, I think and I appreciate everyone's patience. I think we're just working through this in real time to try to have it be, as Board Member Anthony has pointed out, as accurate and as strategic as possible.
Joy, did you get that? Can you repeat it to us?
I don't have it, I have the words,
Uh,
but I don't have it like listed, I'll have to go
I think
listen
we
to
have
the
it.
recording.
Yeah, we have it on recording.
Yeah, I have it on recording, I have notes that I'm taking. So I have legislation and funding, appropriate funding. Sorry, I can't read that.
Couple, could you repeat it, please?
Yes, I will, and I'm just trying to remember the language that you, so this is, and I can also put it into the text, but I will read it one time before that. Be it further resolved that Hawaii's congressional delegation is urged to introduce legislation directing the Navy to develop and implement a plan to decommission the Red Hill bulk fuel facility and the facility's underground tanks, and to appropriate funds for the Navy to implement the plan and clean up and basically add language to address Ernie's point and to clean up any associated contamination. I'm sorry, Ernie, you can take it from there.
That may already exist in the aquifer.
And I'm putting it into the chat now so that all the board members can see.
I think to identify and clean up, Erwin, is that the correct terms, identify? I know some of it is like characterize.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, thank you.
So is identify and clean up adequate?
Yes.
So including to identify and clean up any contamination, is that accurate, Erwin?
Yes, that's accurate. Other ways to say it is remediate, but really we want to identify it and know where it is and actually clean it up if we can do so.
So identify and remediate any related contamination, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay. So, and I'm popping this into the chat for everyone to see. Be it further resolved that Hawaii's congressional oh my gosh, I missed that. Be it further resolved that Hawaii's congressional delegation is
George?
urged. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Can you show the chat? Or, oh, wait a minute. Wait.
I can't, so these are gonna take up, so that's.
Okay, that's okay. Go ahead. Couple, we'll get this down.
I'm wondering if we can just adopt the resolution and then maybe have that language sent over to us.
Ken,
Uh,
I just
Or
wanted to make.
Jessica, do we have to read? Do we have to read this into the record?
You know, not really sure. It's kind of long, but possibly.
Or
Or
could
actually, I think if you just you've already discussed the changes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you can pass it as amended and then, just post the final version up.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
based on what couple has already
okay.
said.
And,
So-
and if it helps for the board members, I've dropped into the chat that additional be it resolved for consideration to add after what's, well, before the final be finally resolved.
Okay. So that'll be your motion or?
Sure, that would be my proposed amendment. In addition to, I think, what's already been discussed, because we've amended it a couple times, right? As amended.
So perhaps we can have a motion then to adopt resolution number 931/2021 regarding the Navy Red Hill Fuel Storage Facility and water contamination issues at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam as amended, subject to posting of the final resolution following this meeting. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Okay, thank you. Is
I'll
there a
second.
second? Member Anthony? Are there further comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. Madam Secretary, a roll call vote, please.
Vice Chair Campos-Pro,
Aye.
Board Member Nalehu Anthony,
Aye.
Board Member Jay Kutai,
Aye.
Board Member Roger Babcock,
Aye.
Chair Brian Tayo.
Aye.
Chair motion passes with 5 ayes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. If there's no further business before the board, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move, Jade.
And is there a second?
I'll second. This is Naalehu.
All right, is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor to adjourn, say aye.
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 Are there any in opposition, say nay? All right, we looks like we have we will be adjourning. Happy holidays, everybody. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, everyone here right now. And thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Everyone, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Aloha.
Holiday.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Kalika. Aloha.
Yep. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.